Good morning, everyone. On behalf of American Chamber Mexico, I would like to welcome you to this webinar. Over the past few months, American Chamber Mexico, working alongside a broad coalition of partners, has been positioning a workforce development agenda led by the private sector as a key measure to underpin the competitiveness of North America. At the core of this dialogue are the voices of senior decision makers from companies and agencies that have substantial operations in the North America region. Today, we will hear opening remarks from Ambassador Anthony Wayne to help frame the conversation in today's complex context. Next, Nancy Taggart, Senior Youth and Workforce Development Advisors at USAID, will facilitate a dialogue among executives from Boeing, Siemens, and CISCO. Michael Forrest, Director of Functional Development at Boeing. Alejandro Canela, Vice President and Country Manager for Mexico and Central America at Siemens. And Mario de la Cruz, Senior Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at CISCO. All of them will share how their firms have successfully hacked the educational system in order to benefit from better skilled supply chains. In the interest of time, we will broadcast the bios of each participant during his or her presentation. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to Untitled Canada, the Wilson Center, and the entire team at American Chamber Mexico for making this event possible. And now, let's listen carefully to Ambassador Anthony Wayne.
Thank you very much, Jorge. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you here today. So even before COVID-19 swept across this continent and the rest of the world, workforce development was a major challenge in North America. And it was clear that all three countries were underinvesting in their workforces. We were already seeing massive changes taking place in workplaces at every level, highlighted, of course, by the companies that had the access to technology and the capital to pay for that technology, but still these changes were taking place and having impact at jobs at all different skill levels. And what was clear was that there was a great need to develop programs and approaches that allowed workers to upskill, for incoming young people to have the skills they needed to get these starting jobs, good jobs for the future, and that companies had to have programs for regularly retraining their workers if they wanted to remain successful in the global competition. Well, with COVID-19, all those trends have just accelerated. Things have gotten tougher in some sense, and on the other hand, there are a number of opportunities that come with that to take the technological advances that can really move all economies to a new level of efficiency, working much more quickly, connecting much better. But what this means is there's a built-in advantage for those companies that have already started with using approaches, creative approaches to technology and to training their workforces. It means it's going to be harder for those SME, small and medium-sized enterprises that were already struggling to adapt new technology and to train workers. And from a social and governmental perspective, the challenges of making sure that there are programs in place and educational institutions in place that are ready to upskill workers, to train young people, stand out even more starkly. And that's sort of where we are as we come to this discussion today. I had the opportunity to work with a number of other people over the past several years, and at the Wilson Center, we put out a study on workforce development in North America, and we found a number of the challenges that existed there. We also found a number of very successful models at local levels, particularly at the state or provincial levels, where government, the private sector, and academic institutions had partnered together to help meet the needs of those localities. And these are the best models that stood out to us as we looked across the three countries. For example, in Mexico, we highlighted examples from Querétaro and Puebla. In the United States, we highlighted a number of states that were leading this transformation with their public policies. And then we looked at a number of localities. One of the examples we cited was an example of Siemens working in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I mention that because Siemens is going to share with us its model today. And then in Canada, we looked at a particular example in the city of Surrey, where they brought together their local manufacturers, their educational institutions, and had very good results in training workers. And it's this kind of partnership that's essential and is even more essential today as we go forward. At the national levels, Canada is clearly the country of the three that is giving the most attention to these issues. And I think it's fair to say, however, that there needs to be more national level attention in all three countries, particularly with the pressures of COVID as we go forward. We're really fortunate today to have three companies that have changed their business model for some time now and put in place the kind of programs that are needed to invest in their workforce. A 2018 study by Accenture looked at a wide range of private companies. And what they found was that indeed there were a number of companies that were leading the way, but that most companies, including big companies, had not changed their business model to build workforce development training into the fabric of that model. So we get to see some excellent examples today of doing that. And as I mentioned, even with these companies that are doing that, that doesn't help a number of the smaller companies that are so essential, as we know, for job creation across an economy. And that's why you need public policies to help create an environment that makes this kind of training more accessible. So I look forward to hearing the discussion today, to the learning from these outstanding examples from the private sector that are leading the way, and encourage you to listen very closely and think through what you can do, working with your own company, working with your own local academic institutions and your local authorities. Thanks very much, Jorge.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Wayne, for that excellent framing. You've certainly identified some of the promising models that we're going to hear about, and some others in North America that we can be keeping in mind. Before we dig into some of these models, I just want to remind everybody that there will be a Q&A segment after the discussion. So if you have questions as we're hearing from our speakers, please go ahead and put those questions in the chat box, and we'll be collecting those and reading those out after the discussion. Thanks so much. So yes, as I said, Ambassador Wayne really touched on just some of the key considerations and things that we should be aware of. And thank you so much again. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to American Chamber of Commerce in Mexico and IYF for helping facilitate my involvement. So I'm just going to segue into our speakers now. As Ambassador Wayne led in, it is crucial more than ever now that we're investing in workforce development to upskill existing workers and new job seekers. So we're going to hear now from a few of leaders in their sectors and their innovative models. So I'm first going to just ask each of the speakers to give us a snapshot of their workforce development model. Specifically, what is your delivery model and how are you scaling that? And I'd first love to hear from Michael from Boeing.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to this session. It's very important that we talk about this topic. And as Ambassador Wayne mentioned, workforce development and the need for this was pre-COVID, but COVID definitely has accelerated it. Most of you know about the fourth industrial revolution, which really hearkened in a whole new level of accelerating technology. So once all the technology was put in the cloud, like Azure for Microsoft or AWS at Amazon, it means that it's not just that Word and Excel and PowerPoint are suddenly in the cloud. It means that you can do all kinds of things much faster in the cloud. So things like AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, those will accelerate technology much faster. And so we've got to develop people and upskill them to keep up with these new technologies. With COVID, it created a crisis, of course. Now people are virtual, and yet they still need to be developed, especially all the unemployed people as we look at future jobs for them coming out of COVID. So the Boeing model, just real briefly, I'll go into it and then we'll get into more details in the Q&A session on the panel, is really to focus comprehensively at all levels. So we're invested in K through 12 STEM education with a lot of investments and initiatives there, particularly with the National Science Foundation. And that includes for underrepresented minorities and women, and involving them more in technology. At the university level, improving how universities are teaching about technology and preparing people for jobs. And then internally, I'll just talk briefly about that model because that's really our model that we use going forward. And it's really 12 major divisions, over 100,000 people, and really thinking through how do we scale. And so what the model that we've come to that seems to be gaining success is to really sit with the leaders of each division and understand their business strategy, look at their workforce capacity plan and say, what are the critical roles, which are the critical roles that really need to be developed in a given year, and in order to meet that business strategy. And as we look at those roles at all levels, from interns and individual contributors up to first-line leaders, to tech fellows, to program leaders, up to senior leaders and vice presidents, we look at that entire stack of roles and say, who's critical to make this division's business strategy come to life? And then what we really have then applied to that is, once we identify it by division, those roles, we take a life cycle approach to developing them, from definition of the role to hiring, to onboarding, to upskilling, to performance support on the job, to elective role and career roadmaps. And so the idea is to be very comprehensive in who we go after, tied to the business strategy, and how we develop them across the life cycle. Key to it more and more is assessments, and getting data and being data driven on who has which skills in the workforce. And so it's really about roles and skills and data, and pinpointing upskilling based on the data. So not whitewashing people and requiring a whole bunch of training, or offering open enrollment where you get random people attending. And then getting smart with modalities, short curated modules, virtual learning circles with experts, coupled with on-the-job application and proficiency sign-off. So that's our approach in a nutshell. Now we apply what we learn outward to our supply chain, providing that to customers, partners, and suppliers. And then also we've looked to take it, as we work with countries and industry, to a country level, and how we apply workforce development to countries and industries. And I can say more about that as we get into the panel questions. But maybe I'll leave it at that for now and let the other speakers identify their models and describe them.
That's great. Thanks so much. That's a good first take on very complex model, I'm sure. Alejandro, we'd love to hear from you about Siemens' approach.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to join our ideas and be with also Boeing sharing this forum. So what is our model? And Siemens has a responsibility with the society we work with, and specifically with the countries we participate, or within the countries we participate. And we understand also that this journey of developing resources cannot be concluded alone. The participation of the triple helix, as we were saying in the past, where education, industry, and even government is needed to coordinate efforts, and that help us to make the difference. And it is a little bit complicated to coordinate these three elements to deliver the results that are required. But it is not possible to do it in one single side. So our approach is, at least within this region, we believe on the dual education model. We combine the apprenticeship in the company and the vocal education and the vocational school in one course. The system is practiced in several countries also, in the United States and Mexico. And what is another element by now that I can share with you is how we identify the needs on the industry, because we are
a little bit different from the rest of the company because we are a technology company that provides technology to other companies, like Boeing, for example. So in this case, we create and identify needs between the companies that utilize the technology. As you know, we create technology for the Industry 4.0, the one we just talked about. And then there is a need on the companies to utilize this technology. And sometimes even there is no knowledge about what is the technology available. So we need to educate the companies about what is the latest technology. Some of that we provided to those companies, and what are the needs on those companies that we need to see on the universities. So we have people trained to implement this solution. So what we are doing, for example, in the last years here in Mexico, with the help of the government and some education or some universities, will go and invite companies to have what we call a consultancy 4.0 exercise, where we identify the needs on the industry, we guide them about what is possible, and we contrast that to what they have. We identify the needs, and with those needs, we go back to the university and train them on those technologies. So this way, we are contributing to the society, and this is part of the model we are applying.
Thank you so much. I know we'll get a chance to hear more about that in a few minutes. Mario, would you like to talk to us about CISCO's model?
Sure, Nancy, and thank you to the American Chamber and Jorge for the invitation. It's great to be with such distinguished colleagues. We have our flagship program, which is called CISCO Networking Academy, where we have the vision to be the bridge to career the possibilities for people everywhere by providing the best workforce development program in the industry. And when I speaking about the industry, I'm not just speaking about the ICT industry, but the whole industries, now that the tech needs are all along the economy. And we're not just talking about networking per se, as people will usually think, but we're talking about software development, cybersecurity, programming. And at this program, Nancy, we have a very ambitious goal to positively impact 1 billion people by 2025. So far, we have impacted positively almost 500 million persons because we're talking about the whole ecosystem. We're not just speaking students per se, but we're speaking about teachers. We're speaking about a lot of people that interact with us, our partners, which are extremely important for our program. So far, we have achieved, we have trained 11 million students worldwide, just 2.1 million in the last fiscal year 19, where 28% of those students are female in 180 countries. In Mexico, we have significantly grown this program. So far, we have trained in the history of the program in Mexico almost 500,000 Mexican students, and for the last 12 months, we had 120,000 students. But these numbers are, believe me, they're no easy to reach if you do it by yourself. We do it through an ecosystem, which is a three-way program. First, of course, CISCO providing the content, providing the learning management system, but also we have also the partners and we have the academies. The partners are partners like IYF, which I also would like to Jorge for all his support. Great partner, by the way. The partners help us to sustain and grow the ecosystem, right, by bringing new academies, bringing new partners, to train the trainers, which is extremely important for the scalability of this program. Because we provide the academies, which are mostly external public and private education institutions, probably in a higher degree, where they receive the knowledge from us and from our partners in order to deploy that to the students. So this is basically the model that we have, and we can talk a little bit about the in more detail later. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much. Well, let's talk a little bit more right now. As you just touched on, you work with public sector institutions, that's kind of your core entry point. So I know that that's what we really want to hear a lot about today in terms of how you and our other speakers are working with those types of institutions and what strategies you have used. So sometimes it can be challenging working with those institutions. So and yet they're also great opportunities. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've navigated those challenges and what strategies you used?
Yes, for sure. And just let me say that just in Mexico, 80% of our academies are public institutions, so that's quite a challenge. The first and probably the most obvious one is budget, of course, because as I discussed, we depend on the budget of the academies, right, to deploy the program. So if there are budget costs like what it's happening right now in Mexico, right, the program is at stake. So that's definitely a first challenge. Second, that the public institutions understand the concept of co-investment, because also an essential part of this program is, for instance, the actual physical lab where the students develop and learn how to develop their skills. So, and most of the time, some public institutions believe that, you know, private sector should put everything for free. So this co-investment concept it's quite sometimes a challenge. Also, sometimes they feel like they don't want to, let me use the concept, to marry to one vendor or just one technology. And one thing that is important to mention is that we do not teach CISCO technology. We teach technology that can be applied to all, for instance, networking type of gear. Of course, we use CISCO here in the labs, but we are technology neutral in this program. And also, a very, very important challenge for us is government transitions right now. Like, for instance, the one that we had in Mexico a couple of years ago. Because when a government transition happens, you depend on the vision of the current administration in order to continue working. And sometimes you have to start from scratch, right, in order to develop the relationships, make the full understanding of the program and the partnership, and the impact that you're going to have in increasing the workability for the workforce and the students in the future. So those could be the main challenges to work in the public sector.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how you navigated some of those? I mean, you touched a little bit on getting them to understand this concept, trying to work with a vision. Tell us a little bit more about what's been effective for you in Mexico or in other places.
We try to be away from the political cycles. We try to work a lot at the base, particularly directly with the public institutions, right, with the deans or with their directors of those institutions, because they get to understand the value of the program, right? For instance, just a statistic, Nancy, 93% of our students globally, and Mexico is no exception, have achieved, you know, or a labor opportunity or a better education opportunity due to our program. So the persons that are in charge of the program at the public institutions directly, they do understand the value. The challenge is to make the public officials to understand, and sometimes that takes time, but eventually they will get it.
That's great. No, I think that's important, who you tap into within these institutions, trying to avoid some of these more political waves, as you said. So kind of building on that, I'd love to come back to Alejandro at Siemens to talk about this concept of these internal clients or decision makers within these institutions, and how you worked with them. What's the argument you use or the strategy to convince them to partner with you? Alejandro, can you talk around that issue a little bit more?
For sure, and thank you for the opportunity. I could not be more in agreement with Mario's points. We try to move away from the politicians and get focused on what is needed. I believe, honestly, that we should follow the approach of a pull than a push, and I will explain myself. So we do not push technology to the companies, neither the educational institutions. We create a bridge. What is a bridge in this case? Is identifying the needs on the industry around those universities, which is different from one state to the other. And then we work with the universities, training them on what is needed for those companies. This way, we ensure an employment for the students that we are preparing for, and we ensure that the companies get the benefit they are looking for. It is not easy because it's complicated sometimes. Honestly, and I don't know if it is happening to my colleagues also, the biggest challenge is the teachers. Sometimes they love to teach what they have been doing for years. And when you bring new technology to the universities, they say, yes, it's cool, but this is what I've been taught for years, and it will continue being that way. This is one of the challenges, especially in our case, that every year we bring new technology to the market. That is a little bit complicated. So for attacking that challenge, we give lectures because we want the students to push the universities of what they want to learn. And I think now they are more vocal. They ask the universities, and sometimes they learn by themselves. We identify students getting into our platforms. It could be happening the same with CISCO. Where students, even extracurricular, they go into our platforms to learn because they are eager to learn the new technology. So it's important the institution, but it's also important the students. If they love what they are learning, they will be pushing to get the best and the latest also.
So let me just restate that. I think that's a nice angle that certainly resonates with a lot of the thinking that we're trying to promote within USAID. And it's refreshing to hear that from the private sector, tapping into the students and hearing from the young people themselves, if I understood correctly, and using them in a way to push for some of these reforms and to demand it. So I think that's exciting. Yeah, I mean, pivoting a little bit, do you want to talk at all about some of your work, particularly with manufacturing and kind of the role of onshoring? Do you want to talk about skilling for that sector and how Siemens is doing that?
Sure. Well, in the manufacturing, we create solutions, specifically automation solutions and software solutions for the manufacturers, right? So what are the technologies we are seeing they are more eager right now to bring in or the needs they have? It's specifically or mainly the following. So we have seen a growing demand on planning and manufacturing scheduling. Also the digital twins to simulate the implementation of new changes within the factories required to comply with COVID. This is specifically happening right now. The layout of the factories are changing, and now they have more needs to identify what is the best layout within the factory or the manufacturing. So they are using our technology to simulate how the new factory will work. Collaboration is also especially important right now because we are right now, working from home. So technology to collaborate remotely is really important. Cloud solutions, obviously, operated remotely. There is a trend that probably we could go deeper later between merging what is the traditional IT, the ERPs, with OT. I mean, the plant floor, the systems on the plant floor, and the engineering work. I think this is one of the biggest challenges. Artificial intelligence is also critical, as we were saying, machine learning and additive manufacturing. I think those are the trends. We are getting a need from the industry to support them.
That's great. Thank you. I will probably kind of go back and forth a little bit. So come back to you in a moment, Alejandro, but let's shift over to Michael and hear more about some of the fun things you were teasing us with at the beginning regarding Boeing's model. So given the state of the aerospace industry, tell us more about why Boeing continues to invest in a talent pipeline and who are your private and public sector partners?
Yes, thank you, Nancy, and I appreciate Yeah, sure. Thank you. And appreciate Mario and Alejandro's comments. Been a fan of Cisco and Siemens for a number of years, so thank you. Yes, it's really about this investing through a downturn. You know, before the whole COVID crisis hit, as I mentioned, this fourth industrial revolution was hitting, and I was actually at Microsoft for 14 years and just at Boeing now for 2 years, moved over to really work on digital transformation and workforce development. And we could see that when the operating system could go in the cloud, that was always the holy grail. You know, once you could do more in the cloud, you could accelerate technology at a lot faster pace. And that's, you know, partnerships around the world, and Cisco's involved and Siemens and others. But the idea is that you can do more in the cloud with enterprise applications. And so if you think about how AI and machine learning and quantum, which haven't even really hit us yet mainstream, become a part of enterprise applications affecting day-to-day work of workers, it means you're going to need to have people upskilled. And when I was at Microsoft, I was leading a team of consultants that were working on digital transformation and culture and workforce development for our customers. What we saw was any company that was starting a digital transformation usually started with a small pilot. And then now you see companies really trying to do wholesale change of digital transformation. And that's really what Boeing's doing. It's across all divisions that they're digitally transforming. So it gets exciting when you think about manufacturing and supply chain and all the other pieces. Engineering, of course, is 54,000 people at Boeing. And the idea is really to say, hey, coming out of this crisis, the good companies might not survive. The better companies, and this is an Andy Grove quote, by the way, from Intel, my first CEO way back when, great leader. But the good companies may not survive. The better companies may barely survive, but the best companies will come through stronger out of a crisis. And this was in reaction to the Pentium flaw, if anyone remembers that from Intel years ago. And Microsoft certainly had their crises, you know, over a period of time. But now with COVID and this combination Boeing's experiencing with the economic downturn, the airlines barely surviving, it's really seeing how we can invest to come through and be stronger. And it's really meant to be, you know, the competition is also investing but struggling. You know, I think Airbus, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, but also new entrants in like SpaceX and Blue Origin and new tech companies that are getting involved in the aerospace industry. So what Boeing's done is really looked at all levels and invested in a number of areas. You know, like big companies like Siemens and Cisco, they're a good corporate social, you know, responsible partner in their communities. Boeing's provided $1.8 billion in community investments over the last 10 years, $240 million in 2019. There are 15,000 partners in that space. And, you know, we think about workforce development, it's a number of government, university, nonprofit partners that I'll get into just in a moment here. 254 STEM grants, 29 million of dollars that employees have donated and that's an increase of 46% of matching funds over the last few years. We invest a lot in veterans and return flight. So a lot that kind of precedes and sets the foundation for all this. But then we get into the specific levels, and I'll just click through briefly in a little more detail the levels. So K through 12, really big investment, $11 million with the National Science Foundation, building out STEM education. And that's really focused on all K through 12 with special attention to women, females, and underrepresented minorities in STEM education. And in higher ed, oh, and by the way, in K through 12, there has been work with IYF, who's here, and some good success stories here that I know Liz knows about online if anyone wants to hear more details. But at the education level that gets to the higher education piece, which I think is interesting that Alejandro mentioned, there are several things happening. There's a real disruption there with COVID particularly, but there was already a disruption taking place. We work closely with the Global Engineering Deans Council to really change how engineering is being taught. It's too much lecture-based. We were in a session in Romania last year, and there were students who came in and protested against lecture. They said, it's got to be experiential, more internships, more real world, enough with this old school lecture stuff. And of course, the dean said, yes, but we have these professors who are stuck, like Alejandro, you were saying. And then there's a cultural difference about speed. The private sector needs things fast, and we need it to be very practical. And so we're really looking to see how we can improve higher ed, a really strong partnership with MIT, for example, on technical leadership as we look at model-based engineering. How do you create a plane in a cloud before you ever build a prototype? Totally new and different, where everyone can work on it, all these engineers at once. And so how do you get to this cutting edge tech applied to learning? And that's where we get into some of the new R&D work we're doing around AI and virtual and augmented reality. And then we get into machine learning and quantum and how it can be applied. So partnerships with universities, we also want them to help us create certifications, because we see a 4-year degree, a good foundation, but actually stackable credentials are even more important. So how do we keep certifying people over time? We can't put people back through a 4-year degree to keep them fresh. So we've involved major universities, even community colleges, in building out certifications. And so it's breathing in new life to technical colleges and community colleges, which in the US have been a little bit forgotten about. They still play a really important role. Internally, I think I talked about how we're upskilling our workforce. We bring people in through internships, rotation programs. We bring in veterans. We have a return flight program for people who've stayed at home to take care of kids or sick family members, so they can return to the workforce. So we bring them in. And then we go after this workforce development system I mentioned, tied to business objectives, doing that development and upskilling piece. And really what we see it leading to is pulling in a lot of different resources. We have 3,300 courses. We have degree.com, which is a really conveyor of a whole bunch of curricula from Pluralsight and Skillsoft and edX and all these different providers. Tuition reimbursement plays into this, because if people go back to school, we want them to get the right certifications that are needed for the business. And so a lot of this is leading to stackable credentials that are certifications, that are micro degrees, that are continuing education units, and maybe even like Boeing degrees. And so the future is really disruption of continuing education beyond a 4-year degree, or maybe even supplanting a 4-year degree over time. So all this to say, that's where we think it's headed. And I mentioned we apply it to customers, partners, and suppliers. But I think an exciting level for Mexico is, taking this to a country level. And with Canada, it's a proposal, right? It hasn't come to life yet, but the Canadian government's very interested in saying, how do you apply a more systematic workforce development approach at a nation level in an industry? So how do you focus, as Ambassador Wayne was mentioning, on small and medium businesses? How do you look at what do the leaders need? What do program leaders need? What about tech gurus? What about teams and first line leaders and individual contributors in an industry? And so how do you think about maybe core and common skills for the roles that cut across many different small and medium businesses, and go after assessments and developing more systematically those small, medium businesses and even large businesses in an industry. So you're more comprehensively doing supply chain pipeline development for a country. And I think there's something there for Mexico, and Canada's certainly interested in it. I think the US could benefit from that as well in a big way. So it's about more data-driven, systematic development and upskilling of an entire sector and industry. And that's something I've worked on that I proposed with Canada that we're talking about. As Alejandro and Mario mentioned, it takes a lot of partners to do this. We partner closely with the World Economic Forum. They provide a lot of data, but we also work with our competition at the World Economic Forum. So I like to refer to it as coopetition. We're cooperating where we need to find good AI resources, training providers we all could use, because we all can't build the training fast enough to keep up with the way technology is accelerating. And then we compete like crazy in other parts of our business. But coopetition seems to be a good way to go. Rework America is focused on upskilling the US. It's particularly important with COVID, with 30 million people out of work. And how do we give them the skills to come back to work and enter some of our companies? So it includes government, nonprofits, universities, colleges, certainly all those folks that we're working with. And then some really good providers of training. So Pluralsight is a company you may have heard of, but I used a lot at Microsoft. Our chief technology officers at Microsoft love them. But at Boeing, we're using them as well, because they bring in the best people who are on cutting edge technologies to build courses, keep them fresh, and really provide the latest on AI, machine learning, quantum, as I mentioned. And then they're also part of degree.com, which is this aggregator where all of our employees can tap into any of these courses at any point in time because we have a corporate license for everyone to tap into it. So that was just a bit more depth on what we're doing, kind of all levels from K through 12, universities, internally, thinking about nation and country level and how we support that, in really thinking about the workforce for the future and future of work.
Thank you so much. Wow, you've given us lots to think about and lots to jump off from for further questions. I mean, maybe just going back to one thing that you touched on and others have, just maybe briefly, this issue of working through the teachers. For them. I'd love to hear maybe Michael first, but others chime in. You know, what has worked that you've seen? This is a challenge I have certainly come across in the program that USAID supports. How do you find incentives to motivate them to do things differently? As you said, they're always doing things, you know, based on how they were trained however long ago. What incentives work with that level?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say a few things and then leave space for Mario and Alejandro. Yeah, it's really, I think, working with the institutions to say this should be part of their deliverables as a teacher to stay fresh and be connected to private sector and the practicality of what their students need to do once they graduate. At the university level, we've invited MIT into some of our strategy sessions so they could understand how they need to customize degree programs and teach differently in a practical way to meet so that their students come out meeting the needs of what the private sector wants. And so MIT is a good example of that. Stanford, Georgia Tech, Purdue, I can mention a few universities around the world outside the US as well. But the idea is make it a part of their deliverables, even bring the teachers and professors in for internships within the company. So they actually spend 3 or 6 months within the company to better understand where their students will be working in the future. So yes, we've talked about this with the Global Engineering Deans Council and in making sure that the instructors better understand what's needed, and then just at a foundational level, understand how they need to teach more experientially and more practically to their students rather than just lecturing on the stuff they've known for years.
Would Mario or Alejandro, you care to comment on that question as well?
Sure, Nancy. I first, Michael, thank you for your words regarding CISCO. Also, and I'm building on Michael's point, I think you should be able to highly involve the teachers in this process, Nancy. And one of the things that we have saw in the networking academy instructors is that at least 92% says that networking academy have helped them to become better educators. And also 85% of them says the program has had a positive impact on their life. But as we were speaking about the challenges that our COVID is bringing to the table, and I think the challenges are the same, but just bigger and broader right now. One of the things, and we have been advocating a lot for instance, virtual education for quite some time. But we have seen two main challenges. First, internet access. 1/3 of the global population does not have internet access. Second is an issue of affordability, because you have to afford internet access and you have to afford the devices. So that's a very important challenge. The other challenge that we have found is the digital skills of both the professors and the students that were forced to go virtual in this stage of the pandemic, right? So these are the type of challenges that we are overseeing right now, particularly focusing on the teachers.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's an important point that we face and affects all of the programming that we're certainly trying to do in this area. Alejandro, any thoughts on that?
Oh, just to complement, totally agree with Michael's and Mario's point. I really like the comment from I will add also this trend to learning on demand. I think right now, with the technology, I've been invited by several universities to define the curricula, and the first thing we think is, what are we going to teach them if that technology will not be valid in 3 years or will not be? So I think we need to teach students how to learn to learn, right? So how to get access to the information that nowadays, as Mario was saying, internet is there. So I think they have more information that they can even digest. So training the students how to learn and work with the teachers to be a coach instead of delivering information only. I think those are the things I believe could help us to address this challenge.
Thank you. I mean, I think we have time for a few more questions, but I want to make sure I've asked our three speakers this major point, so to speak, because I think this is really capturing the theme of this session. We really want to hear from you all what your advice would be to other firms who are grappling with some of these challenges or have the opportunity to work with public sector institutions to scale their workforce development programming that they have already, or to establish a workforce development strategy. What advice would you give to other firms to drive public education workforce development efforts? Why don't we hear from Michael? You seem ready. Go ahead.
Well, yes, I think it's really going back to their business strategy and really thinking about what they see that they need for the future, but also being a good corporate citizen. You know, there's a responsibility of companies to do more to promote workforce development in all sectors and industries. Yes, they're going to be driven by their business strategy and their needs within a company, but they really need to be thinking about what their products and services are and what they need at a foundational level, all the way from K through 12 to universities and onward. Their help and support in developing skills at all levels, I think, will not only provide them a better pipeline, but provide all companies and sectors a better pipeline. So it's not only self-serving to a company, it's a good corporate, social, responsible citizen as a company to do more for countries and for our world today. As we move to the future, you know, as Ambassador Wayne and I were talking at the beginning of this call, we don't want people left behind or countries left behind. Everyone needs to be moving together forward in this world, and or we get too many extremes, and that leads to trouble. So I think a company owes it to the world, and also would want to do this for their own business. And so there are several layers of responsibility there that everyone needs to embrace. And then they just need to get practical and specific about what they can afford and how much they want to go after at all levels to advance K through 12 universities, and of course their own population and their partners, suppliers, and customers.
Alejandro, do you want to tell us your take
Sure.
on that question? What's your advice?
Well, I love the comment of corporate citizens from Michael. I think we have a responsibility with the society. So we need to contribute to the society that we are working with. I think my advice, at least from my experience, is students, specifically young people, are eager to work on challenging projects. This is my vision of pull or push. If you create a challenge, if Boeing says, for example, or if Siemens, CISCO says, we have this project and we want students to work with, they will be in line. They will be eager to learn the technology to really attack that challenge. So we have the capability to excite them, to challenge them with a real project. They will be there. They will join.
Nice. So tapping into that enthusiasm and demand again. I like that. Mario, how about you? What are your parting words of advice here for other firms?
Thank you, Nancy. No, definitely we have a responsibility as companies, as an industry, to help to address the inequality problems that we have in our countries. Every country has it, even the United States, which is one of the most developed, not even talking about Latin America. And in the way that we can contribute to the development of this workforce, we will definitely we will be tackling these type of problems. One of the things that we believe at CISCO is that we're not training this workforce just for us, as Michael was saying, and we're just not even training just for our industry. Every company right now is an ICT company, they want it or not, right? And they all need ICT specialists. For instance, we have detected that, we have analyzed that in Latin America, there are 450,000 requirements of ICT specialists that are not being fulfilled by the education system, right? Just in Mexico, there are 150,000. So those are the type of challenges. If we contribute to train those students, there are jobs and better paid jobs that can be fulfilled. And in order to that, we will help to address each one of our economy's challenges. Another big challenge that we are seeing right now, Nancy, is cybersecurity. Now that probably half of the population of the globe, probably more, is being forced to educate themselves, work remotely, and even communicate with your loved ones, we have seen that cybersecurity attacks have been multiplied. And there are not enough cybersecurity specialists worldwide. So this is another area of opportunity that all companies have to work with, because we all do have cybersecurity challenges ahead. So
that's very helpful. Yeah, and we didn't even have a chance to talk about that in any detail, unfortunately, today. Maybe that can be something you touch on in a future session, Jorge. So we are getting a few questions. I know we have just maybe 10 minutes or so left, but I'm going to try to read out some of the questions, and I'm going to pitch them to different speakers. So we do have a question related to higher order thinking skills and the soft skills that we hear so much about. So I don't know if any of you would feel comfortable talking about strategies that your firms have used through your curricula that you support to change teacher practices in order to develop these skills. I mean, this is something that USAID certainly grapples with, and we usually integrate that into our programming, but are firms, are companies like yours integrating those into your training programs? And if so, how? Let's start with that one. Anyone want to take that question?
I mean, I could start and jump in. Yeah, we've talked about this at the higher education level with the global engineering deans. They're struggling. It's work in progress, but they realize that the technology is changing too fast to teach it all in a 4-year degree. So how do you teach the higher order skills that are needed to be able to adapt to any new technology as it's accelerating? And that's a big question, right? It's like, well, okay, so strategic thinking, business acumen, communication, certainly data insights and data analytics, really important, because the technology will pump out new data or will have data associated with it. And so how do you start to change your curricula, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, to be able to manage new technologies as they're coming in and accelerating? And some of the best I've seen are maybe some tech MBA programs that are doing that. The University of Washington has a good program on that. But I think everyone's struggling, realizing the technology is accelerating, and these human soft skills that go along with the technology that will require faster upskilling of people are really what's critical to focus on as they're emerging and declining roles and skills. And I mentioned the World Economic Forum's probably done the best research and work I've seen on publishing, what those emerging and declining roles and skills are. And now it's a matter of, okay, what do you do with that if you're in education, and how do you, as a teacher or an institution that's trying to train teachers, how do you take that and start to apply it? And I think we're just on the forefront of that. There's a lot more work to be done.
Thanks, Michael. I don't know, Liz or Jorge, do we have time for one more question, or should we just, okay. Do one quick one. So there's another question about the durability of skills and the extent of competitive advantage. So how do we skill or upskill with longer competence periods? I mean, it's somewhat related, but how do we make sure these skills are more durable, not just necessarily the soft skills? I don't know if Mario or Alejandro have thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to jump in with a real quick answer and then let everyone else jump in. We see them changing. There's some durability at a foundational level, at a core and common level, but then the new technology will alter the way roles need to perform their work. And so reassessing to understand how the skills are shifting and reassessing if people have the skills as they're evolving is critical. And in our IT world, for example, we're reassessing every 3 months our IT folks, because the technology is changing so fast, and that's soft skills as well as technical skills, and then looking to upskill from there. So just wanted to turn it over to Alejandro and Mario.
Sure. I think one very important thing is the communication between the education system and the private sector, because many times we have seen that it's very difficult for the education system to keep up with the change of the type of skills and needs that the company have, right? For instance, we, as I mentioned, we started our networking academy, and that's the reason of the name, right? In just focusing on networks, but we have shifted that original focus to programming, to digital skills, to software development, cybersecurity. So that type of communication with the private sector, I think, is essential to keep all the educational system programs updated. And that doesn't happen actually as often as we would like to.
Yes, yes, yeah. Alejandro, please go ahead.
I could probably complement that it is not the technical skills, as I think we have said. It's more about this capability to learn, to solve problems, to coordinate, even time management. And we all know this is a critical skill right now, especially nowadays. The emotional intelligence and this creativity, those are things that last forever, right? Once you have it. So the capability to work within a team, to lead a team, to create together and solve problems are things that will last forever. Technology will change every 3 years, as we know, and even faster in the future. So I think we need to develop those skills, and as I said, learn to learn.
Nicely said. I think that reinforces a lot of the messages and strategies that we try to promote in USA's programming. So thank you so much for your wise advice. I'm going to turn it back over to Jorge to close our session.
Wow. Thank you, Ambassador Nancy, and also Mario, Alejandro, and Michael for such an enriching dialogue about how each of your firms has strategically developed talent supply chains to make your product supply chains more competitive. As Churchill would say, we should never let a good crisis go to waste. And in this moment of profound disruption to our supply chains brought about by the combined forces of the global pandemic, the fourth industrial revolution, and a recent renewed trade agreement, we cannot neglect our talent supply chain. As with our disruptor multinational supply chains, our talent needs are experiencing what is called like a bullwhip effect, as demand quietly fluctuates, not only for workers, but also for skill, sending poor market signals to the relevant supply chains. Current disparate approaches only further confuse the message to education and training providers about industry, priorities, and needs. Therefore, we must consolidate our strategies to send strong and clear signals to education and training providers about what skills each sector need, when they will need them, and at what scale. What would such a strategy look like? I propose we pursue two convergent paths. First, we create a trinational workforce development community of practice to support each other to apply best practices for sector-based workforce development strategies. As Michael mentions, we need to disrupt terminal education. We must explore to change how students learn, incorporating project-based learning, moving forward from lectures, leveraging technology. How do schools keep up with the speed up of cutting-edge technology? If we can put students back in a 4-year degree, how do we incorporate short-term training, stackable credential, microcredit to upskills workers, and a new entrance? How do we move beyond a boutique model to a national sector-based strategy? What are the data needs to facilitate this? What do firms need to cohabitate? The second point is that from that agenda, we establish a set of asks for national and regional governments and also ODAs to establish the policy and public finance framework needed to facilitate this strategy. Let us know through the organizers of today's events your interest in participating in this forthcoming community of practice. Thank you very much for your time and stay tuned. Have a good day.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Stay well.